Needlepoint, the record collector podcast with Paul Lester and Daryl Easlea.
Hi, I'm Paul Lester, editor of Record Collector, Britain's oldest, longest enduring music monthly.
And I'm Daryl Easlea. I too work for Record Collector and I'm the editor of the Rare Record Price Guide.
And this is our podcast Needlepoint, where we look at rock's rich tapestry, as Judy Burchill once called it, through the prism of the latest issue of our magazine.
And what we do, it's called Needlepoint because in one sense we look at it like a record. We've got a long track on side one and then various shorter tracks on the other, and sometimes maybe a bonus EP or download card. And
a sense of jubilation, because this is our first anniversary, isn't it? We've been doing this for, is it 13 episodes?
This is the 13th episode, unlucky for some, the baker's dozen.
Extraordinary. And it coincides with a great new issue of Record Collector magazine, which I have here. And on the cover, talking of reasons to be cheerful, parts 1, 2 and 3, on the cover there is, for the first time since July 1979, if my calculations are correct, on the cover is the band Squeeze. Hasn't been seen since the heyday of the band. What did they have out in 1979? Was that...
Oh, that was the golden year. That was the year of their two number twos.
Right, okay. So this...
Up and cool.
And it does feel like they're having a bit of a moment. And my feeling, I mean, their new album, Trixies, it's not out till, I think it's a couple of weeks till it's actually out. But yeah. My feeling is that they're going to have their biggest or the highest charting record maybe ever. This is my estimation. It just feels like they're having one of those moments like Madness had with Norton Folgate. And, trying to think of other example. XTC haven't had that moment yet, but it feels like they probably will in the next couple of years. And Costello, I think one of the Costello albums in the last 8 years since I've been at Record Collector, I'm pretty sure he had a sort of a comeback.
I reviewed the last main album and it was brilliant. It was full of really sort of punchy, pithy, on-point songs. And you talk about punchy, pithy and on-point. You know, there's Squeeze.
Well, what's extraordinary about this record is that it's a 52-year-old record in a sense, because it's re-recordings of demos that they did when they were respectively 16 and 19, Glenn and Chris.
Yeah.
They had them. They didn't just refine them. They knew they were there, didn't they? But it's just they hadn't fully worked them up. And what it does, it just takes you back to the future, because I didn't realise that Squeeze were one of those bands. I had a weird dream where I dreamt that they were touring with Sparks this summer. It turns out I was completely wrong.
That upset the internet briefly.
There is a sense that Squeeze have reclaimed their Europeanness with this album. And the review by Terry Staunton in the last issue of Record Collector, the reference points were Bowie, 10cc and Sparks. I always think of Squeeze as kind of Americana-tinged college rock US favourites from the 80s, and in fact, actually, they were more Queen, Bo Rap, and quirky, audacious time signatures. I think what this album bears out.
Well, so and you listen to those first albums. You listen to the Cat on the Wall single, and I mean, it's basically ABBA. You know, I always thought this sounds like a punk ABBA. And then they were all that quirky time signature stuff like early XTC.
Yeah.
But then I think, you know, where you're saying rightly is once East Side Story began, and I think Paul Carrack smoothed it out and brought out the soul element of it a lot more. And I think by Play, I mean, they were almost forgotten over here and became an American, signed to Reprise. You couldn't get a more American label.
That's right. I remember seeing. I think it was Glenn Tilbrook toured with Amy Mann in the 90s. Yeah. I remember going over and watching it, and it sort of made sense in that sort of area. But they reclaimed their otherness, and it's a delight. So hopefully they will have that big hit.
It's a fascinating piece because Jeremy, who's written it, Jeremy Allen, has spent time with both of them individually, with Chris Difford record shopping and with Glenn at the sort of studio base where he's got his record collection. So they're both sort of discussing the music that's influenced them and also discussing the history of Squeeze. And it's such a fascinating relationship because it shows how they can make it work. You know, they're going to the office to make, work on a project. Even
though they haven't really, in their very own words, haven't really had a relationship to speak of for many a year, decade. And it's a strange admission, but, they've obviously both had the conversation and they don't mind each other saying it. But they don't live in and out of each other's pockets. They
No,
have
far from it.
a fully working relationship, like you say, like clocking in at the Brill building at 9 in the morning and clocking out at 5 in the afternoon.
Yeah, they found this way to make it work, and it's almost like, they're divorced, but they're going to all of their kids', award ceremonies and weddings and functions, because they're, you see them on stage, and there is undeniably a dynamic between them, because they've been associates, pals, partners, collaborators for over 50 years.
Well, this hopefully will remind people how great Squeeze are. So I think we've tended to take them for granted. They've almost been around for too long. Nothing sort of dramatic has ever happened, and so we just sort of allow them to be there. And this record now, by sounding quite unsqueeze-like, they've managed to remind us how great they are.
Yeah.
In the way that Madness did with Norton Fulgate, which was a quasi-conceptual piece, wasn't it? And this is a bit of a concept album, isn't it? About a weird nightclub in the 70s.
Yes.
That sounds like an episode of a particularly lurid and surreal episode of The Sweeney.
It is very much of that world, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating. And I can't recommend enough. I think I've said this on at least 3 or 4 of the podcasts so far, but to see them live, because at the moment they have become something very special. And I think it was that thing, what you were sort of alluding to there, that they just became never meat and potatoes, because with those songs, there was always magic there. But it was a bit like, well, we'll see Squeeze next time, or Squeeze around again. I know, I've seen them 5 times, and I saw them not by chance, but I thought, okay, I'll go again. I haven't seen them for ages, and it was just like watching a completely different band. And the only thing that I've seen like it was Talking Heads in 1980. It was just show. Just put on. I mean, it was, before Byrne was running around and getting really theatrical, but it was just 8 people completely locked in, and they got this guy Steve Large on keyboards, he is a showman, and he comes out and does his turn, and they do is it Goodbye Girl or something, where he plays accordion. There's percussion going on and girl vocals, and Chris is sort of at the back with his acoustic guitar doing his little bit, and then Glenn, I'll say it before I say it again, but possibly the most underrated lead guitarist we've got in this country.
Which is an incredible thing to say, because people don't really talk about guitarists anymore and their prowess. I certainly never thought of Glenn Tilbrook in that way. I think of him as part of a couple, tunesmithery couple.
Yeah.
And the allusion to the Lennon and McCartney or the Beatles was made way back in the circa East Side Story, that they were the Deptford Beatles and all that. I mean, I never thought of them in that individual sense as virtuosic players.
But I think the thing with Glenn is that he uses it so sparingly. That's what makes it so special. It's like that thing I say often. I said it in the Topographic Oceans review. Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. And right. I think the only person I like him to is Ernie Isley. He's got that sound when it comes in. And it's just, as I say, it's in little fragments here and there, So anyway, in short, buy the new magazine with Squeeze on the front and go and see them live.
Well, the incredible thing is there was the sense, as we've already said, that they were playing small venues and you could take them for granted, because there was the feeling that they were going to come around. But no, they're playing the O2. Is that another dream I had, or is that real?
No, that is true.
Because I know they supported Madness last year, but this autumn/winter, they are the headliners at the O2, supported by Billy Bragg.
I mean, they have their show. I mean, I saw it at the Cliffs Pavilion, my local venue, and that's a 2,000 standing venue, and they scale the show up, and I can just imagine the show is going to be scaled up because it is quite theatrical, and it's true. I saw them in pubs. I saw them both solo doing their solo things, and they're both entertainers. They come from that tradition, and Glenn,
they do. They remind me. They actually, because I mentioned 10cc before, they remind me of when I went to see 10cc in January 1976 at the Hammersmith Odeon. They were supported by Chaz and Dave, and Squeeze are a bit like that. They're a bit like, what would happen if Chaz and Dave made a record with 10cc? Yeah, that's what this record is a bit like. And it does invite theatrical present. Yeah,
well, yes, that was their "I'm Not in Love." That was marvelous.
Yeah, but this record does invite theatrical presentation, so hopefully, and then they could do a 2-part live affair where they do one part is Trixie's, which is the new album, and then a show of hits like Sparks have done several times.
Indeed, that's where the idea obviously sizzled into your brain, because you said it to me in the office, and I thought, I don't think so, but I'm sure you probably know. You being
well, because they got the same PR. They got the PR. Sue Harris is the PR for Squeeze and manages Sparks, so it made sense on a sort of practical, functional level. Then you think about Take Me, I'm Yours, and Slap and Tickle. Hold on, those are Sparks hits in all but name. But Sparks when they went a bit electronic. And they both have catalogues that warrant reinvestigation. You know, why would, and also they're warming up for dates that they're doing separately in the autumn/winter. So it made sense.
Maybe Sparks playing. They're playing the Chelsea Pensioners' Home, aren't they?
Right.
There's a little summer series they have there. And, maybe they might come on as their special guests now. Well, you've single-handedly done it. You can introduce them.
Gigs that never happened that I dreamt about or wish they had. There's a few of those, actually. I swear I've seen Hall & Oates, but not standing behind their instruments, actually coming to the front of the edge of the stage, just mics in hand and really looking like the Beverly Hills hairdressers that they should have been. But soulful, but meeting Warren Beatty Circus Shampoo. That's the gig I always imagined Hall & Oates did put on, but of course they never did. And you see them on live on Old Grey Whistle Test, and it's not nowhere near that at all.
No, I think when you get those images in your mind of how a band should look or a record, what it should accompany. I mean, for years when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the film French Connection because I couldn't see it. Fantastic. But you just had that image of him shooting up the stairs, and it was like, when you're 6, 7, 8, you just think, cool, cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, whatever.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Popcorn was in the chart. Hot Butter, the proto-synth number. Which, if I look over here hard enough, I have the album.
That's not the one that Giorgio Moroder did. He did.
Son of My Father.
Son of My Father, yeah. So from sort of similar.
From the same era and the same stable. I can't put my hand on it. Oh well, story of my life. It's over there somewhere. But I was convinced that Hot Butter was going to be the theme to French Connection. When he was out running around. And then I saw it later in life, and it wasn't.
I could have sworn. I don't. You'll be able to correct me on this. Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong. But I always thought that Funkopolitan, the 1981 funk pop combo, played a gig at the Wimpy Bar on Oxford Street because it was like the radical, unrockist thing to do. Did they?
Readers, listeners, you tell us if they did. It sounds like something I could imagine would have happened.
Yeah, what a brilliant thing to do. I would have loved that. To me, a venue, the Oxford Street Wimpy Bar, brightly lit, right near the street.
Yeah. Funnily enough, this year just passed. It was my mate's 60th, and we had a surprise party. We took over our local Wimpy Bar because we're all Wimpy heads down here. It's still going on. And also, fascinating fact, Elton John refers, not by name, but to the the grease-stained windows of an all-night cafe, or Bernie does, which is the Wimpy Bar in Oxford Street on
very good.
Better Off Dead on Captain Fantastic.
Fantastic.
And interestingly, Wimpy, like Gentle Giant mentioned Wimpy, Genesis mentioned Wimpy, and I think there's one other prog band that mentions Wimpy. So it's quite a
mentions of food in prog songs. There's an article.
But I think Wimpy's, because that was the only place you could get,
That's right.
And I love that tale when Cher came over. I think they were doing I Got You, Babe on Top of the Pops, and she sent out for a burger, and someone brought her a Wimpy, and evidently she burst into tears.
It wasn't a Bender brunch, was it?
A Bender in a bun. No, Bendy. No, it's called. It's no.
Is it? How they changed that? I think one of the great things about this issue of Record Collector is the varied nature, but also the idea that it contains a series of firsts. So it's the first front cover in this country for Squeeze since 79. But also, did I dream this? The extreme rock writer, as Paul Morley called him, Ian Penman. Did I imagine it, or did he actually interview the band Swell Maps in 1980 for the NME, or did he just make a very cursory mention of them? It's stuck in my mind that he either wrote a sentence about them or he wrote an article about them. But anyway, there's been nothing about them since. Swell Maps, who are they? They're actually described by the writer of the article as the band that never was. So we've done a 4-page feature on this group, Swell Maps, and I still don't know what they sound like, but I'm incredibly intrigued by them and the series of aliases that they've assumed for the duration of the band's lifetime. Swell Maps. I think one of them is called Jowhead.
Jowhead, yeah.
And I need to turn to it to verify what in fact they were called.
It's definitely an Ian Penman type turn, because I always, Biggles Books.
Epic Soundtracks.
Epic Soundtracks, of course.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because they were brothers, weren't they? Nicky Sudden and I need to.
The other one. But it's fascinating because they were those bands like TV personalities, Swell Maps.
Monochrome set as well. They just didn't fit in with all they weren't punk funk, they weren't post punk, they were something quirkily different, weren't they?
And also, I know, coming from a different place, but This Heat and Nurse with Wound were two of those other. When you didn't have, when you had spare money, then you bought what you wanted, or if you took a punt on something, it was something you thought you would like. Whereas those groups, I got into Throbbing Gristle just because they seemed really cool and a bit other. But it was definitely if ever there was a period where you went out and bought lots of things recommended by writers, I don't even know if that happens anymore, does it? Only in my reviews, darling.
But I spent a fortune on stuff that probably some of them was iffy and some of it was mind-blowing and life-changing. That's the gamble that you took.
And you want to talk about that. I'm very lucky in this new issue to speak to, as I always say, my Bowie, Peter Hammill, or Peter Hammill, as you like to call him.
Peter Hammill, that's right. Is it Hammill?
Hammill, and there's a picture of me and him, and I'm showing him that, which is a cross stitch or a bit of embroidery that my daughter made me for Father's Day once, because she knew that's his logo, by the way.
Ah, fantastic.
The H, the M with the H through it.
Right.
And I got into Peter Hammill because I was going on a bank holiday weekend jaunt to Blackpool. My dad had always wanted to see the Blackpool Illuminations. So he said, he had some time off work, and he said, right, let's go and see them, which is all well and good, but we live in Essex, and Blackpool's up in Lancashire. So the drive, I just remember, and this was before the motorway system was fully connected, took as long as you could imagine it would take. It was probably about 10 hours or something. And it was like, by the time we got to Bedford, I was starting to sort of,
hallucinate.
Yeah. But what I did, I used to buy all 4 music papers each week. And Angus McKinnon, who name you don't hear very often, he was writing about Peter Hammill, and this was 1977. And Van der Graaf had just brought an album out called Quiet Zone, Pleasure Dome. And I just thought I had some money to spend over the weekend. I thought, I'm going to buy that record. The name, everything about it, Van der Graaf, the Quiet Zone, the Pleasure Dome, before Frankie, obviously after, it'd been
the other bloke.
The other bloke did it. And Hammill. And he was clearly a punk survivor, because this was, August 77, where lines were being drawn.
Well, that's right, because famously John Lydon had him on his playlist at the Capital Radio, the Tommy Vance interview, where
later that year
he talked about Dr. Alimentado and stuff like that, I think was in there. But he was rescued from the dustbin of history, wasn't he, by Lydon, and he made him seem cool thereafter. But then conversely, I remember Nick Kent reviewing one of his albums, and it was savage, if memory serves. I don't know if it was again 76, 77.
I think it was over. I think the thing is, it's like, he is like Spark. Like a lot of things I like. You either love it or you hate it. And...
Well, putting you on the spot here, how do you encapsulate him in 5 to 10 words? Because I don't know anything about Peter Hammill. I don't know what he sounds like. I don't know
really?
what he stands for.
Well, he stands for absolute independence. He realised, this is more than 10 words, but I'll give you this bit here. In the mid-70s, he started to realise which way the wind was blowing, and he was never going to be, a pop star. So he set up his own label by the end of the '70s, and started releasing himself. And you sent off the lyric sheets and things. But then he went back to Virgin, and then from 1988 he's been an independent, and he had his own. Before the internet, he had newsletters he used to send out and things, and has this fervent fan base globally. I don't know, probably 50,000 globally, if that.
Right, that's not bad. I imagine the phrase caustic confessionals comes to mind, even though I'm not familiar with his work, but that's what I imagine it sounds like. Sort of spiky, artful, angular songs of love and loathing.
Yes, that's some of it. That's some of it. Art rock.
Rock.
To me, it is art rock. It is in 2 words. But what I say to you and say to our listeners, if you've never heard him, his voice, you've got to get used to the voice. It's either it's not like Tom Waits,
right?
It's one of those sort of voices. It's either you like it or you don't.
And what record do we start with?
Well, I would always start. I mean, I like his poppy stuff. Because sometimes he can. Sometimes it's a bit much even for me.
Well, I like those people that like Frank Zappa and Todd and all those people that could have been pop stars on another planet where they were slightly more forgiving. Is he one of those?
Well, I mean, what is fascinating was that, some of the songs he's written have been absolutely, beautiful love songs and things. And in the, I've got my Peter Hammill albums here, and I'll just show you this. That he went in 1984-85, he was managed by Gail Coulson, and she also managed Peter Gabriel, so she had both Peters on her books.
Right, okay.
And of course, they both came from the same charisma stable. Van der Graaf and Genesis toured together, and they're great personal friends. And of course, by the mid-'80s, Peter Gabriel was becoming a big star. And obviously Phil Collins, the drummer of Genesis, was becoming a big star. So they made a thing, they re-recorded his albums, and they did an album called The Love Songs. And for those of you who are listening on the radio, he's slicked back, sitting a bit sort of like, hello, madam.
Well, he's actually a good-looking fellow, isn't he? In the 80s.
He's good-looking. I mean, he looked like, a young Michael Palin.
Yes.
In his day.
Yeah.
And he had that look. No, I mean, incredibly charismatic. You see him on stage, and he just exudes that intensity. So, I would say there's an album called Nadie's Big Chance, which he did in 1975.
Yes.
2 years before Punk, and the title track, apart from it has saxophone, but then you could say Laura Logic, is Punk.
Well, that's his probably his best known song, isn't it? Because the little tagline about your contribution to you interviewed him, it was "Nadir We Go."
Yes, very good. One of Johnny's. Or was that you?
That was I nipped in there at that point.
Oh, you did that one,
and I nipped out again.
Very good.
I'm still dining out on it. But Peter Hammill all the way to Dogs D'Amour in this issue, and actually talking of Ian Penman and childhood heroes, and Hammill for you, one of my childhood favourites was this chap called Tony Cummings, who wrote a book about the Philadelphia soul sound.
Absolutely.
Of the early to mid 70s, called The Sound of Philadelphia. It came out in 1975, and some of the sentences in that book were writing about music by people like Harold Melvin and the OJs and the Delphonics, Symphonic Soul and all that. Some of the sentences were as good as the best writers from the NME. High praise indeed. Yeah. I didn't buy that book till I think 1980, so it was a little bit after it came out. But anyway, it's always been a favourite book of mine. So it was a fantastic and tremendous thrill to have in this issue a brand new piece by the aforementioned Tony Cummings about Philadelphia soul and the transition from Philly soul to disco. Yeah. So he does an introduction to he sets the scene on the first couple of pages, and then he picks the dozen or so what he calls the proto disco dozen, and featuring people like Len Barry and Chubby Checker, even the Vibrations, little known stuff until you get to Archie Bell and the Drills. I Can't Stop Dancing, a little bit more familiar, and then the Tramps, Zing Went the Strings of My Heart, and the Times, You Little Trust Maker. Fantastic stuff. Great writing. 40 or even 50 years on, still got it, Tony Cummings. And what a thrill to have people like that working for the magazine, especially at our pay rates. So a great reason to buy the magazine. So next to Pete Hammill across the top of the magazine, The Cult, it says here, How Philly Became Disco by Tony Cummings.
And then you've got... Sorry, Paul.
Go on.
Well, I was going to say, then you got Lois speaking to Otis Williams, the grand man of Motown who's still doing it in his
The Last
original
Temptation.
outfit.
Yeah, yes. Oh, great piece, great interview. 45 minutes with, and every minute counts. So it's a great capsule history of the Motown era and beyond. Of course, Temptations had their hits phase and then their psych soul phase. And it's all covered in the 4 pages that she has an audience with him. Lois Wilson, great interviewer, and he's a great interviewee actually, considering he's in his mid-80s.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's such a charming man, and he always, he's one of those great professionals that whenever you have interviewed him or met him, it's like you feel like it's the first time he's ever done it.
Yeah,
just
happy to be there, happy to help, and that's what most people always say to me. Who's your favourite interviewer or your favourite interviewee, and who was the worst? And I can never think of anybody to put under the worst section, because whoever it's been, whoever I've interviewed, and I've interviewed thousands and thousands of musicians, they all want to be there because they all want to promote the thing they love, which is their latest record. So yeah, none of them really have been shirty or arsey. I mean, it's a shame because sometimes you kind of long for that because it makes for a good read. I have heard occasionally Iggy Pop was a bit rude to, I think it was Mark Kellen. I heard it on the radio. I thought, that sounds a bit off. But they've all been, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, whoever it happens to be, they've all been really, really nice.
So you've done them all.
I've done them. The only ones I haven't done are the 5 that people always ask you. Did you ever do? And it annoys me because they ask you, knowing full well they don't do interviews. So did you ever do Michael Jackson? No. Have you ever seen a Michael Jackson interview? Yeah, Danny Baker in 1980. All right, smart ass.
Yeah.
Prince. Well, how many Prince interviews have you read lately? Well, none lately over the last 10 years. So it's usually they ask you about those just because.
Who else are the other?
The other ones would be Madonna.
Yeah.
That's about it, really. The 80s mega stars, maybe Bruce or Dylan. Have you interviewed Bob Dylan? No, have you? They just do it. They do it to get their eyes because they know they can't bear you to get the satisfaction of lording over them the fact that you've interviewed Jagger and Richards and Phil Collins and Sting. Well, I haven't interviewed Sting actually, but I'm trying to think. I've forgotten now who I've interviewed. But there's all the big ones apart from the 5 aforementioned.
I always remember my Sting moment. I mean, I've written for Sting, but I went to the first Mojo Awards. They did award ceremonies. And I had just seen recently, my wife used to do the marketing at a theatre in Edmonton called the Millfield, and Jimmy James had appeared there a few weeks before with his, whatever vagabonds he was on at that point.
I believe Randy California played with him at one point.
Oh yeah, no, I think they've all been through his books. And Millfield Theatre is a brilliant little theatre. And usually, in fact, I saw Chaz and Dave there. I have a picture of me and Chaz and Dave taken backstage, which became the picture I used in my first Chic book, just cropped in on me. But if you pulled it out, you'd have seen Chaz and Dave either side of me. Yes. However, Jimmy James performed there, and he did this version of "I'm Stone in Love with You," which I would put in my top. Yeah.
And one of theirs?
As by Mathis and the Stylistics. And honestly, I would say top 5 live performances of all time.
Wow.
He could have been absolutely, could have been at Vegas. He could have been at, wherever, the Blue Note Club in Greenwich Village. He could have been anywhere. And it was just amazing. Anyway, I go to this award ceremony about a month later, and it's marvellous. First time we did it, and, there's Roger Daltrey, and there's Jimmy Page, and there's James Brown. It was like, and there was Jimmy James. And I couldn't believe it. It's like, there he is. I've just got to go and tell him. So in those days, you remember you used to go to do's, and they would have little disposable cameras on the table.
Oh, yeah.
Pre-phone, and you could take pictures, then send them in or whatever. So I was walking with this mini camera to Jimmy James. I was walking to him, and Sting walked past me. It sounds like an old Vic Reeves thing. You never guess what it's about to say. Sting walked past me, and he said, "I bet you want your photograph with me." And I said, "Well, I don't really, but
if you asked."
if you're passing, why not? So he turned around, we did a proto selfie.
Oh, wow.
And there's me and Sting, and I might actually put it in the. I could drop it in the podcast now. So that's
I'd like to see it. Oh, well, yeah. So you didn't do what Roger Morton of Loaded magazine did when he interviewed Sting and asked him for about 10,000. I think he asked him for 10,000 quid. Well, I don't know how it ended. I presume he didn't hand over the acres. But yeah, you sometimes get that feeling, don't you, when you interview these multi-millionaire megastars?
Oh, well, give us a few, Bob.
Yeah. Because I've interviewed. Yeah, some of the names are coming to me now, like Janet Jackson and the Jacksons. And, you know, some of them have had. They've probably got a couple of quid. Brian Wilson. But I've never quite managed. We were talking about Sting, and just to show how all these things are interlinked, and I mentioned Randy California. In 1978, I went to see a band called Spirit live and third on the bill were in fact Sting and the Police.
Ah, how on?
I remember three pogoing proto punks at the front of the Rainbow in London getting asked to leave because they wouldn't sit down for the concert. And I don't know if you know who the other band was on the bill that night. Spirit and the Police. Who was the third band on the bill? You'll never know. But it included or involved a seminal character somehow related to the aforementioned, way back at the beginning of this podcast, Danny Baker. It was, drum roll please, Mark P and Alternative TV.
Alternative TV, yes.
Formerly of Sniffing Glue, which
because you sort of forget that Danny Baker, you know, that was his route in. I mean, he was like the fanzine king with Mark P.
Yes,
back there. In fact, Alternative TV, another group filed under Swell Maps and TV personalities.
I never quite got what the sound is trying to achieve, but you know, good to have them out there doing whatever they did, and they did help pave the way for the next phase, which was the post-punk phase.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, when you hear, you know, you realise how much is tied in with memory and love. That, you know, when you hear a lot of that, it all sounds a bit okay. You know, that sounds like Wire, or that sounds like The Fall, or that sounds like that. And I know it was, you know, everyone was sounding like each other, but it's that sort of thing where the ones that really survived and have gone on, like Wire, you know, Wire seemed to be that reference point for everyone at one point. And you even listen to something as sort of, you know, not that obscure, but obscure enough, like the Feelies. Everyone sort of took that first album under their wing.
Yes,
and you hear... was it Forces at Work on there, or the title track, and it sounds like, you know, a band in, you know, Stoke-on-Trent are doing it tomorrow. You know, it's that sort of thing.
I do like that's kind of a good pub conversation. What was the very first post-punk record, the one that that paved the way for the thing that came after? And I often think it was Susan the Banshees, Happy House, or Hong Kong Garden, or was it Magazine Shot by Both Sides, or was it Pills, Public Image, or was it something by Wire? You know, which was the one that signalled the change, which was in a way as dramatic as the change between pre-punk and the Sex Pistols. That was pretty seismic, but it has been argued that actually that the next transition, and then the transition after that, post-punk to new pop, you know, where ABC came out of, and League and Heaven 17. Maybe even more seismic than the previous two.
But it's interesting because we didn't know, you know, post-punk really became a thing once Simon Reynolds wrote that book, and that phrase in the wider sense. Because, I mean, growing up, no one said post-punk. We all said new wave.
Right. I think you're right.
You know, no one said mixtapes. We just said D90s or whatever. It's one of my old bugbears. But, I mean, you know, you can hear it now, and I've always sort of thought that there were those 78 bands... 78, early 79 that did it, but
you're right. Joy Division,
and that sort of the steeliness in it that was there, and it had stopped, you know, because you could only sing so much about I'm so bored and I can't get a job, and my old man's, you know, throw me out the house. You know, that only had such a finite time to it, and then when you suddenly, you know, lied in questioning his image. And, you know, Susie, I mean, you know, Susie, what a talent, you know, and you know, and then, but you also look at the way that Buzzcocks changed, and, you know, you could say a different kind of tension is post-punk, you know, with that sort of angular repetition man.
And in a lot of it, the music changed because they assimilated funk rhythms as well into what they were doing, and that had never happened before. It's very hard to imagine something like a certain ratio, Shack Up or Do the Do coming out even 4 years before. That's a mind blowing thing. You know, when you I often wonder what was the most seismic quantum leap. Was it Love Me Do to Trout Mask Replica? That's 7 years. Or was it Trout Mask to Joy Division? That 10 years. You know, it's just an interesting thing to me in terms of technology and audacity and musical kind of intrepid exploration.
But I think, in one sense, I still think it's the first one, because the first one, well, went from just "Love Me Do." I know, I can't remember the lyric. I know they're that easy. I can't remember them. You know, love me do. You know, I love you.
I love you.
I'll always be true. So please love me do. Into sort of, you know,
Dachau Blues by Beefheart, you know, or the Blimp,
Guru or whatever. I mean, you just think light flows down the river. That's well, by the way, that's my Beefheart impression. But I mean, you know, that, because I think Beefheart to Joy Division isn't actually that different, really, because already there's a stake in the ground for being different TM, and you know, it's there. I tell you what, I was listening to the other night coming home on the train. I thought I just want to listen to something I haven't listened to for ages, and I put Can, you know, the Soundtracks album on.
Oh right.
And it's just like, this is 1970, and they're making music like that. It's just fascinating.
So you would be part of that kind of, as far as you understand it, Can were Talking Heads 5 years or 7 years ahead of time.
Well, you hear that now. I mean, you know, as a kid, the first time I heard Can was I Want More when it went in the chart, and it was almost like a novelty record.
That's right.
Germans in the chart, you know. Just
Kraftwerk were like a novelty.
Kraftwerk.
That was like a novelty hit, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you had him on top. You know, was it that great Tomorrow's World thing where he's sort of like,
that's right.
This is a synth pad. And Michael Roddle, Baxter, of course, the great man, Raymond Baxter. Raymond Baxter, a very urbane man, and what's amazing about Raymond Baxter was his producer for quite some time on Tomorrow's World was Richard Long Crane, who went on to direct Slade in Flame.
Wow, okay.
And he just said, Baxter...
That's a great did you know?
It was just, you know, he could assimilate, because he, you know, growing up, I just thought, oh, he knows everything. But what he could do, just put something in front of him, and like after a minute, he just, you know, assimilated all the knowledge to then be asking the questions like a meister. But anyway, that's Tomorrow's World and Kraftwerk and Can. But 1970, the Soundtracks, have a listen if you haven't listened to it for a while.
I Want More was 76, and by that point, I mean, it's not taken that seriously, is it? That I Want More. It was great to have them on Top of the Pops.
Oh yeah, but you know, we didn't. My other bugbear, you know, we weren't all listening to Can and Noy. We'd love to say we were of a certain age.
That's why Jim Kerr's always good and honest on this subject, because Simple Minds, because he admits that, you know, he wasn't listening to Noy and Faust.
He was listening to Foxtrot.
He was listening to Genesis and probably ELP.
Yeah.
And why not? You know, they were both good, you know, but one you're not allowed to say you liked, and one are incredibly cool.
What, ELP?
A bit like Record Collector, and some of its articles this month. Like, talking of Jim Kerr, I don't think he comes from Edinburgh, he comes from Glasgow, but we've got Edinburgh's finest 45s, the latest in our a year old now. I think it's been going for about a year.
We started it for our 45th anniversary.
We started for our 45th anniversary. It's a series on great singles from various cities around the world, and in this month it's the turn of Edinburgh, starting with the McKinleys in 1964, working its way through the Resillos and Bay City Rollers and Joseph Kay. I mean, it's incredible how many name bands come from.
Yeah.
Especially if you like music of the last 40 or 50 years. Human League, which they've decided,
they claimed
Sheffield band. They've claimed it because of Joe Callis, via the Resillos. Win. Davey Henderson actually is in 4 bands, because he was in the Fire Engines, Win, the Sexual Objects, and the Nectarine Number 9. But great piece from Alan Glenn, our Edinburgh expert.
And I will say just one thing piece of mind that I was absolutely so delighted to do, because I think this is one of the joys of RC is, very rarely, if it's a good idea, do we say no. And I'd always been fascinated by a man called Putter Smith.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you got to do Putter Smith, didn't you, this issue?
Putter Smith was a jazz bass player who played with you try and say Thelonious Monk at this time of day, and he'd played with Mulligan, and he'd played with Carmen McRae and Billy Eckstine and those people. And he was spotted in a nightclub in Monk's band by a guy called Guy Hamilton, who was directing the new James Bond film, and he wanted a henchman, and he couldn't find it, and he saw this guy playing his double bass, his upright bass, and he said, "That's my man." So he went up to him and said, "Do you want to be in the new film?" And the new film was Diamonds Are Forever, which at the time was just, Sean Connery had returned to it after 5 years, and everyone saw, the George Lazenby film as this sort of terrible error in the series, where now actually it's the one that everyone says is the best one. It's like a European art film has suddenly parachuted into a long-running franchise. Nina and Frederick on the score, but that's by the by, Nina on her own actually, and Louis Armstrong. I mean, the final record made by Louis Armstrong, almost from his deathbed, having to piece together the lyrics one by one, and then he's singing about having all the time in the world. I mean,
oh God,
the poignancy of it, and
poignant moi.
Just ending with a phrase "only love" as it goes. I mean, it's Anyway, Connery come back, and of course it was just the hugest news ever. So Putter Smith, urbane bassist of the Sacramento scene, became Mr. Kidd, the famous or infamous gay assassins in Diamonds Are Forever, henchman for Ernst Stavro Blofeld, here played by Charles Gray. I don't think I had much screen time with him at all. And there's my Japanese single of the theme song, and there's my American single of the theme song. And I am on a mission to collect every the Bachelors did a version of Diamonds Are Forever in Japan only, and that's quite hard to come by. But I'm going to Japan this year, so hopefully my dreams will come true.
Are you now?
I am.
Work or pleasure?
Well,
work is pleasure.
I'm always working. I'll be looking at record shops, but as my wife said, we're not going over the other side of the world for you just to look at record shops. Put another word in there. It's a big black album title. But no, I've got our daughters at university over there,
right? Of course,
Australia. So we're that neck of the woods, a one-off. I mean, it was never on the bucket list, but now it is. I can pick up lots of things that looks like that, and I'll be so happy.
This is a magazine of indulgence, isn't it? So I was you indulge yourself with Putter Smith, and I indulged myself by commissioning an article on Friends Again's James Grant.
Yes,
I love Friends Again. They were the band that didn't quite happen in the wake of Orange Juice, talking about Scottish in Edinburgh.
Yeah, he became Love or Money, didn't he?
He became Love or Money, yeah. I just love Friends Again. They I think they're one of those bands that circa 83, 84 got to number 42 in the charts, which meant that they just missed out on the Top of the Pops appearance that would have changed everything. But they had Bob Sargent as their producer, that produced Echo 100's Pelican West, and it was consummate or consummate? Consummate jangle pop, north of the border jangle pop, with a real air of melancholy, Honey at the Core and State of Art and Swallows in the Rain. Fantastic stuff. You never hear it anywhere on the radio. Never see them written about until you open Record Collector, and there's an interview with him about his own musical influences. So that's great.
It's interesting because Friends Again and Love or Money, I mean, they were just, when I was in record shops, working in record shops, they tried everything. I remember free copies coming in double packs,
Well, sometimes it worked, didn't it? With Prefab Sprout, the 15th reissue of When Love Breaks Down. It was like finally.
Well, they did. Yeah, they worked on it, but there were just certain turns where you just knew, or even when they got, slightly. I mean, Hip Sway were probably the most successful of those sort of. Phonogram especially had like a Hip Sway, Swing Out Sister, Swan's Way, like Curiosity Killed the Cat, all just slightly apart from each other, but all that time, Wet, Wet, Wet. Obviously, when it hit, like with things like Wet, 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 it really did hit. But there was also this feeling like, this was on London, but Win, which is in that feature as well. You got the power.
They just completely died a death. But there was a reason for that. I think it was because there was suspicion about it.
Oh, that it was being hyped.
Yeah, because that should have been a hit. It was incredibly catchy. Generally, I think that the catchy pop hits happen if they merit it, but I think an exception to the rule would be Win, because there's no earthly reason why that you got the. I mean, it really is just the quintessential hook laden pop. But then we've got a cautionary tale in Record Collector this month, along the lines of Friends Again and some of those bands we've just mentioned. The Liverpudlian group Care, who could have also been huge, but they were huge in the sense that some of their ex-members went on to fame and fortune, like Ian Broody. But they were affiliated to Wild Swans, and they didn't quite happen. But there's a fascinating. It's only over 2 pages, but it's like a condensed mini feature in the review section this month of Care and their reissued album Love, Crowns and Crucifix on Needle Mythology, the label run by Pete Paphides, who has released stuff by people that we've written about, like Stephen Duffy. Again, he's a record collector like us. He loves records, and he's started a label so he can put out stuff that he likes. He's got one coming up in a couple of months, and we're writing about them, actually. We're interviewing them. The early recordings of Musical Youth, before Pastor Ducci. So that should be an interesting read from Lois Wilson. Look forward to getting that and working my way through that, and also trying to find some photos, because I can only find 2 or 3 pictures of them looking very pop-tastic in 1982 on the back of their hit. If anybody out there's got any decent pictures of them looking a bit more credible and studio-y and grainy and 1970s-ish, they'd be much gratefully received.
Do you know, it's been such a joy speaking to you, so I've forgotten to say, if like and subscribe, please join us with lovely comments on Needlepoint a year on. And they said it wouldn't last. No, they said it would, actually. And so if you do have any Musical Youth, maybe if Musical Youth are listening in or tuning in, pass your photos to the left-hand side, etc. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because there was no reading that there's the original version of Pass the Coochie, as it was on
right.
And when they said when they were in number 1, we have no idea what it means, we've never heard it before, or something like that.
I was like, like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, one of those, ones where
I think they still actually protest that.
Do they?
It isn't that.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, right.
What a world, eh?
So what bookazine should we be telling people about? Because we have the main magazine, which is a fabulous thing, but we have spin-off publications.
Well, we've got old Joel McIver, the king of rock, writing about editing Def Leppard, which has gone down very well with the Lep heads out there. And then we've got Hawkwind coming back out, a little reissue, the perennial power. Yes,
because at the moment they are promoting, the label are promoting the reissue of Hawkwind. Was it the debut album? Was it the eponymous album anyway from 1970?
The eponymous album with Hurry on Sundown on it, the first Hawkwind classic. Where you've got old Dave Brock. There's my copy of it there.
Brocky boy.
Brock, he's sort of, it's a transitional album because he was a busker. And he was
right. He was.
There's a busking compilation he's on before he made landfall as Hawkwind. Not worth very much, about a tenner, but you can see it around. But it's a sort of we use the word proto. You use Quasi and I use proto. You like Boston Quasi, and I like Toto. It's an interesting thing because it's at that point, that sort of not quite found their feet, but it's an interesting record in its own right.
Well, I love the idea that Hawkwind have members who are the buskers. They're George Formby's. What am I trying to say here? Like 10cc, they have this prehistory. It's just the mine benders and stuff like that. How do they go from the mine benders to
really bending minds?
Really bending minds within 7 years. Well, it's not drugs because they smoked a little bit. I think they called them Benson and Hedges mind fuckers or something. It was what they used to call them. That was Kevin Godley. But Hawkwind Hawkwind in the 60s, what they were doing, the haircuts that they sported, the clothes that they wore, and the sort of musical influences that they betrayed. It's incredible. Then by 72, they're right there at the outer limits of the galaxy, playing cosmic space rock.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think speed and psychedelics had something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe the history of rock and roll is partly a history of pharmaceutical indulgence, and it's as simple as that.
I mean, I did when I. You just imagine this before I'd be held down and wanted to be punched. But I went to university late, and part of my degree was American counterculture. And I did this thing, and so I was 10 years older than most people in my class. But I actually wasn't a cock, unbelievably. But I did this thing by playing the Beatles. I said, okay, this is drugs on records. So I saw her standing there, Speed. You've got to hide your love away, Weed. Tomorrow Never Does, Acid, and then obviously Happiness Is a Warm Gun and things like that. When Lennon was on Smash,
okay.
And it's interesting when you hear those. I mean, I don't know if he was on it at that time, but the way the whole thing had changed by that point, and you can hear through that the effect things had on it. And I mean, lots of fabulous music has been made without drugs.
Yeah, well, that's the Wayne Coyne of Flaming Lips argument, is that the least rock and roll thing you can do is take drugs, because it makes you virtually incapacitated, and you can't put in the incredible number of hours that you need to make a record like The Soft Bulletin or Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots. You need to be completely alert for days and days and days. Maybe take the drugs after you've made the record, but certainly not during it. On the other hand, Todd, one of my all-time favourites, his entire catalogue, it reads like the sort of the changes that can be incurred by a different substance. So peyote buttons for Ballad of Todd Rundgren, and thanks something a little bit more lysergic by the time you get to Wizard of Tree Star.
Well, it's interesting, and just in the words of that 1985 hit, "Just Say No."
Yes, well, 86, I believe.
It was 86. I was in our Price Ilford, 86.
Ilford, oh yes, of course.
Oh yeah.
Where our mutual friend Michael Sefton used to live.
Big Mickey Sefton, big shout out to Big Mickey. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. What have you been doing? Have you got anything on the horizon, gig-wise or life-wise?
Well, we're mired in the office. We're mired in Record Store Day. So
yes.
We're working on that. And a possible exclusive interview with a huge recording artist from the 70s and 80s and beyond. I won't say who it is. That's taking up some of my time. I need to venture out now that the weather's getting a bit warmer. I need to venture out a little bit more often. I don't know, I'm trying to think of what gigs are coming up that were on one's attention. What about yourself?
Peak Essex on Sunday. Sparko's going home. John B. Sparks has got a band together, Dr. Feelgood bass player, and he's playing locally, afternoon gig, which would be nice. So maybe a little tincture beforehand, a little curry afterwards, and see some Feelgood's classics. Because I thought Sparko was such an inventive bass player. And also locally next week, the Brit Funk Association, featuring members of
Light of the World, Freeze,
Light of the World, Incognito.
Yeah, I that I'm going to go to. I think it's the Jazz Cafe.
Yeah, well, they're playing the Mill Hall in Rayleigh, which is where I read poetry as a child.
But can we use this as an opportunity to assume a sort of a plinth or a soapbox to complain about the fact that the Brit Funk Night is actually not going to be individual bands that we know and love, Freeze and Light of the World, Beggar and Co., who came out of Light of the World, and Incognito and all those people. It's actually just an amalgam of the odd member here and there. I think that's great, but wouldn't it have been brilliant to have seen the original bands in all their glory? Well, David Grant, though, is...
Well, David Grant's coming back. So
he's doing some, I think, first dates for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be with Sketch.
Oh, I think
Martin.
Sketch has dropped out of the scene.
But who's going to do that bass line from Coup?
Well, I'm sure there'll be lots of cats who'll step up.
My recommendation would be get in John Wilson, the bassist, the 17-year-old from Penthouse and Pavement. Now, he is one of the few people alive. Well, I don't know if he is alive. I hope and pray that he is.
I'm sure he is.
Because he was a kid then, wasn't he?
He'd sort of be my age. not your age, but I'll be nearer your age next time we do this.
Yeah, you're right.
But no, that's true. I mean, when he played on that, that everyone talked about that bass part. Everyone talked about that bass part. But anyway, I realise we should probably say goodbye now because I've
barely started.
So excited to be here.
Yes, well, it is an opportune moment to say thanks very much to all the listeners and viewers out there for spending so long in our company. We really appreciate it. Do buy the magazine; it's out there with the squeeze on the front cover now. Daryl, it's been a pleasure talking to you about matters pop.
Always, darling, and pleasure talking to you, Paulie. And also, don't forget the Rare Record Price Guide. We're working on the new one now. And thank you. Lots of good comments coming in about it. And I was only adding things to it this very morning before we spoke.
It comes out in October, doesn't it? The next edition
comes out in October. I cannot
believe how quickly that's come round. It's astonishing.
But
quite a lot of changes afoot in terms of the content and the look of it.
Watch this space.
Okay, look forward to that. Fantastic stuff. Thanks everybody for listening, and thanks Daryl for what has been a most entertaining conversation. For being you, for being the closest approximation of yourself that I can imagine anyone achieving.
Approximately infinite Darylverse, and we say Yoko 93 this week, so happy birthday to her. And new book by Paul Morley, one of my all-time favourite writers, on an artiste who I need to be more familiar with. And coming back to Ian Penman, I got his book for Christmas, the book on Eric Satie.
Okay. He's written a book on Eric. I did not know that. I've been reading an article that he wrote on Eno.
No,
Steve Burniston, one of our writers, brought it in for me, and I'm still a month later playing my way through it. It's so much to take in. The book on Eric Satie by Ian Penman is very exciting. Something. Sorry.
Don't. Right, on that note, it's goodbye from me.
Bombshell. Yeah, it's goodbye from me, Paul Lester, editor of Record Collector.
I'm Daryl Easlea, but I always have a pop-up.
Bye. Needlepoint, the Record Collector podcast with Paul Lester and Daryl Easlea.